Okay, so welcome everybody. This one is the first Q&A I believe I'm doing on this channel, in this format at least, and I'm here with Dave Maconi. Dave, how are you doing?
Doing well, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it was a great idea from you to do that. And just as we were chatting before the recording, we both get quite a few questions from people that follow us on Instagram or on YouTube. And this way, by saving them up and actually answering them on a Q&A, we can actually be helpful to more people at once. So that is a good idea.
Yeah, I've had even like since like the start of my podcast, I had people send questions and I saved a lot of them thinking I'll make a whole video on this. But looking back at some of the ones I saved, I was like, this isn't, to make a whole video, I feel like I would just kind of be like dragging it out. Some of these can be answered in like a couple minutes. And to your point, like, doing a Q&A, it's like, okay, a lot of people benefit because you and I, I'm sure, have answered dozens and dozens of DMs about people's questions, which is fine. But it's kind of, I mean, I remember like Lane Norton said that he'll debate people, not because he wants to change their mind, but hopefully the people reading get a benefit. And for this, it's like, hopefully we help that person, but obviously, hundreds, if not a few thousand people are going to listen to it. And then, they benefit as well.
Yeah, and maybe just some encouragement. So don't be shy to send us questions. You may not get an immediate answer, but it will be answered eventually because we will save them up. Yeah, so the first question, actually, I wrote up kind of a bonus question for the beginning, and this is if there is one question that I get more than any other, it's whether someone should cut or bulk. It's like, hey, Abel, sorry to bother, or sometimes just a picture, cut or bulk, that's it. So, um, do you think it's possible to put it into words? Like, what are you looking for when advising someone to cut or bulk? Like, what are the main features that you're looking at on a physique? Because maybe that can help some people. If they look in the mirror, they will have an easier time actually deciding what to do.
Yeah, I mean, literally, like, I don't want to say every client, but almost every client of mine has this back and forth of like, what should I do? And it's funny, like, I'll see in my clients, I probably attract that type of personality, like the neuroticism that I had when I was getting started myself. It's like, well, I'm too skinny, so I want to bulk, but I have these love handles or I have this, and I want to cut. And like, I do understand that. I mean, it sucks. It sucks to be in that position. So I understand, like, you're just never happy with how you look. um, I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. Obviously, like, have you recently cut? How's your relationship with food? Are you doing a sport? How old are you? Like, you have like a 15-year-old, like, hey, like, can I cut down? It's like I really regret spending a lot of my high school years cutting. So I rarely, unless you're like really overweight, would I recommend somebody at that age cut. But since obviously, we can make a whole video on this and we'll get to your answer, but I would just say my like main thing I would tell people is that whatever you do decide, stick with that at least for like 3 or 4 months. I mean, preferably longer, especially if you're bulking. But while there's going to be a lot of factors we can talk about that determine if it's probably the right time to cut or bulk, I see so many people where it's just like, okay, I've decided I'm going to cut. 2 weeks later, man, I just need so much size. I think I'm just going to bulk. Okay, I'm done cutting. It's so stupid. I'm done cutting. Time to bulk. 3 weeks later, oh my God, I hate how fat I look. Time to cut. I mean, it's like insane. Like, it actually seems like a crazy person messaging me. And I would just say, like, if you can just get in your head, just realize neither one is going to be great the whole time, and just pick one. And like, don't even bring up the question. If you have a coach, don't even bring it up again for a few months. If you don't have a coach, even more reason, just this is what you're doing, and do it for at least 3 months, then reevaluate, because the back and forth is just the worst.
Yeah. The worst one is actually when people ask me about their body fat percentage, because early on probably I could have given them an answer that would have made them happy, but now that I have a, I guess, clearer picture of, okay, what does 15% body fat actually look like, or what does 12% body fat look like, usually the answer is never going to be quite as good as what they would hope for.
You're breaking
So
a lot of hearts.
yeah, and like someone is making great progress during a gaining phase, and I'm like, nah, I don't know. I mean, probably you're approaching 15%. It's like, oh my God, I really hope that I would be only like 11%. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, for for all you know, it might as well be 11% because that's you're just looking at the midsection, and that looks good. So I think you can still gain quite a bit more. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's just so many things. So Yeah, relationship with food. So many times the easy answer is when you're just looking at someone's physique and you have to make a call. But when someone follows it up with I've been perma cutting a lot and now I don't know what to do or something like that, it's like, man, I mean, even if from an optimality standpoint, maybe cutting would be your best option, it's just really hard to actually advise. So it can be a tricky thing. But I would say that from an appearance perspective, the like in the cases when I say, okay, definitely go into a gaining phase, I'm looking at the midsection, yes. So some decent ab definition, that's a good indication that you're lean. But also typically, like most guys, when they're actually lean, they will have pretty lean shoulders and chest as well. Like their waist will be pretty tiny. Like there won't be like a lot of kind of love handle action going on there. So that's kind of a few things that I'm looking for. And in the cases when I'm like, okay, definitely cut, usually ab definition is minimal, and also like the shoulders, the chest, the back as well. Like that's it's kind of getting to that fluffy kind of squishy point. So kind of that's what I'm looking at. So it's not very helpful, but that's kind of my general heuristic. Do you have anything else that you're looking at?
Well, I also would just add that like asking like what body fat percentage I'm at is just like such an irrelevant. Like I understand the reasons like to get like a baseline, like that's fine, I guess. But like to me, some people have these rules like, okay, cut until 8%, bulk until whatever, 18%, and then repeat. And it's like that's going to be so individual. And like, who cares? Like, what if you're a football player? Why would I tell you to stop bulking up at 18%? Bulk to 25%. Like, if that's like for your sport, like, and you are trying to gain as much muscle as possible, but still being a competitive athlete, then people want to get into like, oh, but like my insulin sensitivity and like the P ratio of what I gain, and it's like, you can break it down into that, but I've never in my life seen like a football player or a power lifter, anybody say, oh, you know what, we really need to like cut you down because you're not at optimal body fat to gain strength. It's like you get as strong as possible and as big as possible in that situation. I really am not like big on the idea that just because you're a higher body fat percentage, you're not going to be able to gain muscle. Like, what real world examples do you see of that? I mean, it just doesn't exist. Like, the most muscular people in the world, as far as like total muscle mass, have higher body fat percentage.
Yeah.
What's the mountain's name? What's his name?
Thor or half
Yeah,
Thor.
Hafthor
So
Bjornsson, right? Like, yeah, man, like you got to stop bulking up. That 500 kilogram deadlift's just not going to work unless you cut down first. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous to me.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Probably it's just a case of your muscles are more visible when you're leaner, so it's easier to gauge. But other than that,
Yeah, and,
anyway,
and when I say all this, I'm ignoring like health and things like that. There's other factors. I'm just saying, like from a muscle gain standpoint.
yeah, yeah, for sure, yeah. All right, so next question is basically, so I talked about kind of autoregulatory eating in the past, which is just a fancy way of saying not tracking calories, which I guess you're doing for most of the year as well. At least the last time I heard you talk about this, you said that when you're cutting, you like to track because water retention and funky things that happen to your body just would make it more stressful if you didn't track. So, but then someone asked, what about autoregulatory training? So, could you kind of freestyle your training a bit the same way as you're freestyling your eating? Um, and I think that's an interesting question. So, what do you think about the idea of not tracking your training that meticulously and just varying things up when you feel like it? What do you think about that?
So people have to understand, like I'm a very meticulous person. Like I track everything that is not helpful for like the goal. Like I just like to see the numbers. So, right now I actually am tracking my calories, but it's also not stressful for me at all. Like, but like right now I could not record my workouts anymore and I'd be fine because I've been around the same strength for a long time. But I like to see the numbers. I record everything. Um, but I could really back that down because again, I'm more or less maintained at this point. If you are trying to gain as much as possible, I mean, I think auto regulation in general is fine. I wouldn't to say like to go in like obviously there's every level of this. You could just say somebody say, well, I just go by feel. Okay, are you just doing auto regulatory training, or are you just like lazy and don't have a structure? You go in and you train chest 3 times a week and biceps 3 times a week. Like there is every degree of this you could have. But I think that if you understand basic principles, I mean, it's kind of like you wouldn't tell a new dieter, hey, like, we're going to just completely do all your auto-regulatory eating. That's probably not going to work for somebody who has no idea of anything related to nutrition, right? Like, you have to understand principles first. So if you understand the principles of progressive overload and adequate recovery and things like that, you probably can somewhat, have it not have a completely structured routine, as long as like you're keeping certain things okay. You're not ignoring total, like, full muscle groups. You're not going in there just saying, well, I kind of want to do this today, so I'm just going to do this. As long as you're focusing, hey, I did back last time, okay, let's do chest this time, okay, I'll do legs next time. And you kind of have an idea of the weights that you've been using, and you're still progressing. I'm sure you could do it. If somebody said to me, hey, you have a year to put on the most muscle on this person possible, I wouldn't do it that way. But I'm sure, I mean, most people don't have a set training routine and a training log. So obviously it works for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is, can you do it? The answer is obviously you can. I mean, it's if you had to train in a different gym for the next year, so you wouldn't be able to compare your progress week to week and things like that. Could you still build muscle? The answer is yeah. Obviously you could. The question is, would we still, or would we actually recommend you to do that? And the answer is no. And it's mainly because having a plan, so having a set structure, having rep ranges that you work with, working with the same exercises week to week, like the main point of that is basically to evaluate how effective your program is. Because really the main challenge is keeping progression as linear as possible, or making it as linear as possible over the weeks and months. So if progress is not good, then and you have a set structure and you're keeping a log, then you're immediately able to spot, like, okay, what went wrong, so you can modify something. And if you're changing up a lot of things, that's going to be more difficult. So like at this point, my strength progression is kind of a little bit hit and miss, because I think I maxed out on a lot of lifts, and on a few I actually don't really want to go heavier. Not unlike you, because I don't know, I just feel like, man, I'm gonna tear a pec at some point, or I'm gonna dislocate a shoulder or something. So I'm kind of just like adding reps. Sometimes go back and just do higher reps, even though I was still gaining strength with an 8 rep target, let's say. So I actually vary up a lot of things, and I think the things that you could vary up week to week are the number of training days you have. So I don't think there is any issue with training 5 days a week some weeks, and then 4 days a week on other weeks. I think you can, the order of exercises, you can play around with that a lot. You can move certain exercises over to a different day if you just don't feel like doing it. So I think with these ones you could play around. The things that I wouldn't change up a lot are your exercises that you do regularly. So if you do a lot of new exercises week to week, then you're just going to have a really hard time actually tracking whether you're improving or not. And also, anytime you introduce something new, unless it's some super, like a leg extension where it's not a lot of technical learning that you have to do, then basically you're just going to start adapting to new movements neurologically. So that's probably not a very good thing. So yeah, but I think number of training days, exercise sequencing, even rep targets to a reasonable extent, I think you could vary those up quite a lot, as long as you don't go bonkers with it, basically. All right, so next question was interesting. So basically, the gist of this question is that they try to kind of transition into a healthier lifestyle. That's not the way they've worded it, but they were kind of off the rails for a while. They lost some structure and they want to return to kind of good habits, eating healthier stuff, but everything just feels so tasteless, and healthy food just doesn't taste like anything. And how to deal with this issue. So what do you think about this? I think this is actually a big challenge for a lot of people.
So just to clarify, this is somebody who is getting into this lifestyle now, and
I
their main struggle. Go ahead.
I think they were in it before and they went off the rails for a long time, and they were eating a lot of tasty stuff, and now they want to start eating veggies again, but it just tastes like cardboard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, this person's like body fat or anything like that, but I would say, for one, if you're one of your goals is to lose fat, inevitably, like over time, I mean, there's a few factors here. Even if you don't lose body fat, even if you're just maintaining, you just want to be quote unquote healthier, eventually you're going to desensitize yourself a little bit, or really resensitize yourself to the taste of that food. So that food that's like a 5 out of 10 right now is eventually start, if you're not continuing to have, we kind of talk about this, Abel, with the refeed situation, the issue of having these super palatable foods. If you remove those, eventually the less palatable foods will become more palatable. Number two, if you are dieting, then those foods are definitely going to be tastier over time because everything is going to become more appealing as you diet. And then three, I know some people say that about, like, oh, the healthy food doesn't taste good. And it's kind of like a cliche answer, but you can make healthy food taste really good. I mean, there's a healthy, if you're sticking to like certain things, doesn't necessarily have to be like always low fat or always low carb or, whatever. I mean, if you saute, like, I don't know, if you say, okay, chicken and broccoli, I mean, yeah, you could microwave that and it could taste like crap. Or you could put garlic and onions and a bunch of spices in a pan and saute that up with olive oil, get some chicken, maybe sprinkle a little cheese. I mean, that's like a restaurant meal. So, I mean, there are some people who are like really at the extreme who just don't find anything but like pure junk food enjoyable. In which case, at some point, you just got to, you know, practice not doing that. But I think you can make some healthy food really good.
Yeah, I mean, what you said. So over time, you're going to find them more appealing as you get leaner. So it's almost like just getting your foot through the door, which is the hardest thing for a lot of people. I actually have a funny story about this just to illustrate how much your taste buds can adapt to something. So at one point, I was using so much sweetener that Diet Coke actually didn't taste sweet to me anymore. Like
Did you
actually,
sweeten it?
no, no, but honestly, it wouldn't have been remarkable for my behaviors at the time. But no, I was that's when I was doing this keto cut, and so I was eating very low carb. So I was having a lot of kind of sweet cravings. I really wanted to eat fruits and stuff, but I couldn't because not part of the diet. So I was always drinking these teas, like just warm teas, whatever, with some cinnamon flavoring or something. But I would add so much sweetener to it that like my taste buds were just so desensitized to anything sweet that yeah, I tried Diet Coke and it's like, what? Like, am I actually drinking the right thing? Like, this has no taste whatsoever, which is pretty incredible that you can get to that place because now it would taste sweet. So, if you're in that position, just know that it's not a permanent thing. So eventually, like fruits will start feeling taste again. Sweet potatoes will start feeling taste again. So one thing I actually want to do a video on this is that guy who you sent me, George Lehman. That's his name.
Yeah, yeah. Mhm. George
He act-
Lehman. Yep.
he actually gave some really good fat loss advice. So he was talking about his 100-pound fat loss diet, and he said that one of his biggest tips is, look, as you're transitioning into a healthier lifestyle, if you've been overeating on all kinds of processed crap, it's gonna feel hard no matter what you do. So you might as well go into it harder, lose a lot more weight initially, and it will also help you to reset your taste buds. So just do whatever, a month of just freaking chicken breast and I don't know, lettuce. Like, yeah, you're gonna hate it, but you would hate a giant fruit salad with low-fat cottage cheese as well, which we would actually like. So that might be actually something you want to try out. Just go into like a super bland diet for a while, and then when you switch back to something more kind of reasonable, it will actually taste pretty good. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely somebody who has been on the extreme, and even still, like, I don't know, I find that I can go back and forth pretty easily. But like, if I'm having junk, like my friends in college used to joke that like nothing was too sweet for me. Like if I had a cup of oatmeal, it was like 8 packets of Splenda plus like protein flavoring in there. If I have pizza, it's not just already, extra cheese and all that stuff. I like to dip it in ranch and queso. Like I'm disgusting. So, but even then, I'll still enjoy like my regular food. So, I mean, you can definitely get used to it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so next topic is something that you're very familiar with, and because you also interviewed what's his name, Brian Haycock. So what do you think of the idea of deloading your lower body 1 week and then still training your upper body, and then the other week deloading your upper body, and then once everything is deloaded, then just continue with training?
I don't really know if I would see a point in breaking it up like that, I mean, I guess if you were kind of like this seems like a question that I would get from somebody who was like early on in their training who didn't want to take any time off from the gym. So this was like, hey, I can still really push my upper body, but and then the next week really push my lower body. I guess you could. You'd still get the benefits of deloading muscularly, but you might not get the benefits systemically. I mean, you really don't have any week where you're just not. I mean, you're probably likely to push your upper body harder in that week if you're not doing lower, and vice versa the next week. So you're taking 2 weeks to accomplish something that could be accomplished in one week, and you're not really accomplishing it as well as it could be. I would just say just do it in one week, get it over with, and have full recovery, have full motivation to get back into the gym. And I mean, I think there's quite a lot of evidence, both anecdotal and research, that shows that there's really not any downside to taking that time off for one week.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with that, I would definitely agree. I would also say that, like, if you're someone who is really resenting deloads, I mean, look, I trained 1,000 days in one streak, never took even a day off most of the time, let alone a week.
Wow.
I mean, oh no, sorry, I'm lying. I went on vacation, so then I did. But okay, then only whatever 600 days. So I mean, you can just auto-regulate your training, and I mean, you can make it work without deloading. But if you're like following a plan when deloads are like a regular thing, then I would agree. Like you might as well just take that week off and actually get like all your motivation back, and also just kind of reset your mind a little bit. But yeah, otherwise, honestly, I think you answered it pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, like Berge would agree with this. And a lot of people would just say, like, implement a training style that doesn't require deloads. Like,
Yeah.
I train 3 days a week. Even talking with Paul Canoe recently, like he just turned IFBB Pro. Obviously, he's got great genetics and he's taking supplements and stuff. But before that, he looked fantastic. He trains 6 sets per body part per week. And that's about what I was doing too for like a while now. And I was just telling you before we started recording, I just set for me a bench press, personal record, lifetime personal record the other day. I'm doing like 3 sets of bench a week and like 3 sets of incline bench. Like I don't think you need this extreme level. So I don't. Why would I need deloads if I'm training 3 days a week? Now, sometimes I will take a little time off for other reasons, but it's not because I really need them. So you could always just implement a training style that doesn't require them.
Yeah, yeah. And since you mentioned that, basically the next question is how, like, when do you need to add volume to your program? Like, how do you know when it's time to add another set? And this is
Never.
actually something you talked about on that episode.
Yeah, yeah. So I say never. I mean, jokingly, but
That's what you said. I didn't hear. I just thought you randomly laughed.
no, no, yeah, I said never. um, so one of the points I made is, and this is pretty much exactly what I said on that podcast, is I said, look, like some people will say, oh, well, you can't add weight forever, so you add volume. But to me, it's like, yeah, but you can't add volume forever. You can add volume less than you can add weight. Okay. I mean, if you're starting at 100-pound bench press for 5 reps, over the course of your entire training career, you certainly could gradually go up to like, let's say 300 pounds for 5 reps, versus like volume. I mean, your average beginner routine, is probably going to have somewhere between, so not like first week, but like, within a year, you're probably doing 6 to 8 sets, right? I don't know that many people who are advanced who are doing like 30 plus sets for all body parts. Most people are doing 10 to 20, whether they're 2 years in the gym or like 20 years in the gym. So this idea that like you're just constantly, you got to add volume over time, it's like so talked about, but I don't actually see that many people doing. I mean, now if you're talking like advanced powerlifters, yeah, sometimes these guys have these workouts that are like 3 hours long and everything, but even then their volume is not super high because their reps are really low. As far as like bodybuilders, I just don't see that many doing extreme levels of volume other than like specialization phases. And I've done that too, but at least my anecdote of this, I've said this a few times. I did a pull-up specialization phase. I was doing like 30 sets for back, and I was doing like 2 to 4 sets for chest. And honestly, my chest and back were improving similarly during that time. So, do I ever add volume to a client's routine? Absolutely. But it's more like because I start them quite low and see how they respond and then go from there. I would say to try to give like a direct answer. If you are recovering, like you feel like you're recovering, your sleep is fine, your nutrition is fine, you're in a calorie surplus, but for a while now you haven't been gaining anything, I think it's very reasonable to try adding a set, adding a back off set, whatever, and seeing if over the next week or two that helps bump you up. I'm not in any way trying to say like the studies are wrong and adding volume doesn't help. It certainly can help. I just think the idea that just doing all this extra volume is really going to be the long term answer. I don't think that's correct.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I'm actually I was trying to think back to when was a time when I actually had to add volume to someone's routine because they were not progressing. And like off the top of my head, honestly, I just cannot really recall any instances. I do remember adding volume just because, like, why not? Let's see if you can actually progress even faster. That we did. But I honestly cannot recall any instances where it was like, man, okay, you're not going anywhere or not getting anywhere. Let's add some volume. Like, I literally cannot remember. And like for example, today I did this Insta live, and someone asked me how many sets I'm doing per week, and I did about around 12 sets for each muscle group, and they were like, "Oh, like so low for your advancement." And it's like it's not that low. Like, could I do more? Sure. I mean, you know this. I did close to 50 sets per week at one time, so I can tolerate a fuck ton more. But I just don't like. It's not like when you become an advanced person, your volume requirements just go up like twofold or something. So that's what I was saying to them as well, that if you put on the first 15 pounds of muscle doing 10 sets, it's unlikely that for the next 15 pounds you will need 20 sets. So but have you observed that with yourself? So was there a time when you clearly can just recall that at that time you needed to make a jump in the amount of volume you were doing?
I mean, the only times I've done that are when I was using specific routines, like like pre-made routines that implemented increases in volume. Where it was like, okay, for whatever reason. But even then, a lot of the popular routines don't do that. Like just thinking back to routines I've done, like Bill Starr's 5x5 was one like early on that I did a lot. There was like Wendler's 531. That does not incorporate increases in volume. HST by Brian Haycock does not incorporate increases in volume. In fact, you're actually decreasing volume. I mean, a standard linear periodization is decreasing volume over time, right? Because I mean, not like long term, but like in the mesocycle, you're starting with higher reps, so your net volume is going to be more, and then you're adding weight and lowering reps. So you're decreasing volume, and like that's a very normal way to go about progression for a lot of people. And then after like 12 weeks or whatever it is, you add 5 pounds, you go through it again. So again, it's really a weight progression. So I can't, I mean, I'm sure there's been times where I've done like back off sets and stuff, sure, but in general it's not my method of progression or breaking plateaus.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're doing 6 sets, or was there a time when you were doing more than 6 sets? Like, what was your highest volume phase ever?
Uh, well, I've done, like I said, specialization phases where a given muscle group was getting 30 to 40 sets. Can't say I've noticed like a strength benefit, more from like a practice standpoint. Um, so like for instance, when I was going for overhead press of 225, within like a month of stopping that routine, even though everything else was the same strength, bench press, like even other pressing exercises were the same, I probably lost 20 pounds off of my overhead press within like a month.
Mm.
But like I remember doing 205 for like 3 reps or something. And
Oh.
then soon after that, I was doing 185 for 3. And I was like, what the hell? But my bench press was the same. My tricep exercise, it was just because I was so used to like, I was specializing in that movement. But from a muscle growth standpoint, yeah, I don't think it makes a huge difference. But yeah, I mean, I used to do higher volume. I mean, I've done 12 to 16 sets for a long time. I never really noticed much of a benefit from it, to be honest.
Yeah. And then to actually answer the actual question, which is when to add sets. I mean, like I try to leave that as a last resort, because once you start doing more sets, it's kind of a longer term commitment. Like from now on, like you will be doing that at least for a couple of months or something. So, we need some time to actually notice if that's doing something for you. Or if strength progression picks up again, then okay, that's a good sign. Okay, that's what you needed to do. But usually before I add volume, I try to have some other methods to break plateaus. So I will play around with the rep ranges a little bit, or sometimes I will switch out the exercise if it's only one exercise that's stalling. If it's a whole muscle group that's stalling, then often that is a good indication that you need more volume. If it's just one movement, then just maybe switch the movement out, or just change the rep range, maybe implement some DUP, so multiple rep targets. Those are some things that I like to try, and I kind of just leave the volume modification as a last resort, and only if multiple exercises are stalling for the same muscle group. Alrighty, what is the next question? Yeah, so basically it's something I've gotten a couple of times, and it was sort of on the theme of how to bulk without tracking calories. And so I think maybe we can generalize this a bit more and just talk about what are some good food choices to make when someone is bulking. And I like this question because this was a big struggle for me as well. So when you go from a cut to a bulk, like how do you do that in a sensible manner so that you don't go off the rails because of the looser structure? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So, but like the original question was how to bulk without tracking calories, basically.
Yeah. I just find that like it's kind of this. It's almost the same question, because if you're not tracking calories but you're making it work, that means that you have a really solid kind of structure and food choices and things like that. Because that's how you cut without tracking calories as well. But the person was like, okay, I can do it when I'm cutting, so I can just eat veggies, lots of fruits, lean protein, and I'm losing fat. But like, what do I actually eat when I start bulking? Because eventually I will be just bloated as hell from all the veggies. So if I want to get in more calories, like, what are some good foods to turn to?
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because there's almost like two different ways to look at it. So I think maybe I'll leave the part to you as far as like the food choices, because the obvious thing is like, okay, well, go with slightly more calorie dense foods, right? And like focus on, just eat until you're satiated, but not until you're really full. Take out some veggies, add in some rice, things like that, which I think is good. Because a lot of people, they won't be able to handle themselves if they just go to, like, kind of like we talked before, if you go to these super palatable foods and you just finish cutting, a lot of people are going to have a hard time with that. I think ultimately, like, the main way I'm looking at it though is like scale weight. Now, for some people, looking at the scale every single day is problematic. I'm not one of those people, and a lot of people are fine with it if you can kind of separate the numbers, and not like tie self worth or anything to that, and understand it's going to be fluctuations. So for me, you know, I'll sometimes go right to the more palatable foods because I don't really have that control issue. And as long as the scale, the weekly average is going up by whatever I'm looking for, half a pound a week, 1 pound a week, I'm fine with whatever. And sometimes that will be, I'll go a couple of days and I'll see, oh, okay, the scale isn't going up. I'll eat a little bit more. If the scale is going up too much, I'll eat a little bit less. As long as that average is kind of tracking up, it's fine. And that's like my main way of looking at it. But, I'm sure you can touch on if you want, like, just slowly adding more palatable calorie dense foods.
Yeah, basically, so I've been struggling with this for a long time. And kind of the best way I found around this is that you keep the same structure, at least initially, as what you had when you were cutting, but really you keep it up for as long as possible, and you're just adding things on top of that to getting more calories. Because the issue for many people with changing up the structure too much is, for one, they just have no practice with it. So they're really used to controlling things in a particular way and their meals looking a certain way. But when it's all of a sudden the energy density is, 1.5 or twice that of what it was before, then it's like, oh my God, what do I do now? So that's one issue. But the other issue is that it's really hard, especially if you don't track pretty closely, it's hard to make small changes in calories. So if you're tracking things closely, then you can just add 200 calories, or even like 50 calories if you're really precise. But if you're changing up your food choices a lot, then all of a sudden it could be like 500 to 1,000. So if you go from eating fruits, like a fruit salad, to eating, porridge, like oatmeal or something like that, that's a massive difference. So that's why I generally like to, okay, so the meal looks the same. So let's say I still have a salad, but maybe I add some cheese, which I didn't add before, or something like that. So that's kind of a good way to go about it. That's my best tip, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think ultimately it's like, okay, calories, and then everything else is just some way to either track calories, indirectly, or they're looking at surrogate markers, but ultimately it's, okay, are you going to track your calories? That's pretty much going to be the answer. If not, okay, can we go by like, food volume or scale weight or something? Ultimately, we're just looking for ways to control. And for some people, that's why if it fits your macros works so well. For other people, they just can't handle it. They can't have some of these foods in the house. And then it's kind of more like what you talked about of like, just this gradual ramping up of the food choices.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right. So the next question was basically if I understood it well. So I hope the person who wrote this will listen to this, and then maybe he can or she can correct me. Because it's talks about 8% body fat. I hope that's not a she then. So do you think it's viable to do like a very short cut for like 2 weeks or something, basically every few months, instead of doing one long cut and go from say 14% body fat all the way down to 8% body fat? So so you shortcut, a long period of maintenance in between, shortcut again, and that's how you go down to 6 percentages of body fat lower than what you are now. Do you think that's a viable way of doing it?
I don't know. We've actually talked about this before. Actually, I think it was the podcast with Steve Hall, and like the first time I had you guys on together. And I tried this my junior year of college, and I'm not saying just because it didn't work for me, it can't work for anybody. Like let's say somebody who's like 2 years into lifting does this, yeah, it's going to work because probably everything's still going to work. But I was kind of tired of like constantly like bulking and cutting, whatever. I mean, because by that point it's been like 8 years, and I said, okay, so at the time I was like 175, and I'm just gonna like cut down to like 170. Basically, I wanted to keep my range smaller, and instead of bulking from up to 18% and down to 10, 18%, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna do smaller cycles. I'll do 10 to 14, 10 to 14, whatever. So I went from like 175 to 170, did that in like a month. Then I took some time and slowly got back up to 175 and et cetera, et cetera. And I did this for like half a year. Now, in the previous 2 years, my freshman year, I netted 7 pounds at the same leanness after bulking up like 25 pounds and cutting back down, netted 7 pounds. The next year, sophomore year, I netted 8 pounds. So, I mean, I was doing really well, within my first 2 years of college. Third year, I tried this method and I gained zero. Now, obviously, I probably would have gained less, right? Maybe it would have been 7, 8, 5 if I did it the other way, or 4. But I mean, I netted zero. And I think, excuse me, I think that there's just, I don't know if we know why. I mean, some people talk about like cementing the gains, holding the gains. Cody Hahn has some research showing that there are different types of hypertrophy, and maybe we get the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy first, and then the myofibrillar hypertrophy comes later. I'm not saying that that's like proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it really seems. I mean, I've even seen somebody like Shelby Starnes, who's like a professional bodybuilder, trains professional bodybuilders, who used to say, "Well, muscle is muscle. I can't see any reason why that would be the case." And then later he changed. He's like, "No, like my experience is now that like that's not the case, and there's something to like solidifying the gains." So I really, really don't think that it's the best way to go about it. And I am in favor of these longer bulks. Even it doesn't have to be like a dirty bulk. It can be a slower bulk, but taking at least 6, 9, 12 months and really putting on that size.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with that, and there was good information. However, but I didn't interrupt because it was actually very informative. But the question actually was, you do that during cutting, so you maintain, cut, maintain. So like you're actually trying to get leaner in this case. So you want to go from like 14% to 8%. He just doesn't want to do one long cut. but wants to like just it's basically like it's like a mega huge diet break. So it's almost
Right,
like,
right. Yeah,
yeah, you're doing much more breaking than actual dieting in this case.
yeah. Okay. Well, then I apologize, but you guys just got a great story. So hopefully you learned
Yeah.
something from it. Um, yeah, I mean, kind of like you said, that like that's a lot of breaks. I mean, you could do it, but it almost it's like some of these guys who would talk about these like year-long diets, and I think some of them just did it to experiment, but it's like at some point, are you like, is the reason because you just hate cutting so much, or is it because you think it's going to retain more muscle? Like, I don't think it's going to retain more muscle to like, or at least I don't think the net result is going to be more. Like, maybe you could have maintained a little bit more muscle by doing it that way. But if you had just finished the cut 4 times faster, you could have gone back into a gain phase, and gotten all that back and more. So, I'm not saying you couldn't do it. I mean, certainly you could, but I would just kind of wonder why. Did they say like what the benefit they were hoping to get from it, or they just said could you?
Yeah, basically it was just could you do it, if I understood it properly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can do whatever you want, but
Yeah.
I don't think it'd be ideal.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's if you really hate the process of cutting, and especially if you're doing this because you think you're gonna get some like mental benefits out of it, then maybe I'm just assuming this because of the nature of the content that I tend to put out. Some people come with ideas like this, like, okay, so can I get shredded and preserve a healthy relationship with food, and not develop an eating disorder in the process, and not go off the rails once I get lean? Then maybe what you want to do is do this just on a smaller scale. So don't diet every few months. Do that, like do 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Something kind of in the middle, which you will still get to your actual goals before 2030. So practice maintenance. I think that's, if I'm hopeful about something related to diet breaks, it's the practicing maintenance aspect. So all right. So actually we're almost through. So let's just look at this one, and then we will see how we do on time. So yeah, basically the question was kind of weird, but it was, do you think that because you can only utilize so much protein per day, so basically, let's say it's 2 grams per kilo per day, then does this mean that it would be better to train more frequently and with lower volumes per session, instead of doing less frequent, higher volume sessions that are more intense, because those would actually require more protein? And you probably cannot build quite as much muscle because you just cannot supply that much protein, and your body just cannot produce that much growth in one day as what that would require to recover from that session. Does the question make sense? I can try to say it again.
So you're saying because you can only accumulate so much protein in a given day, that would be a reason for it?
Yeah, I mean, he talks about like protein utilization, so I'm assuming it's like protein turnover. Like your body can be in such a big positive protein balance per day, so then it's probably better to train more frequently and less volume per day.
I mean, that's one of the major reasons people talk about higher frequency, right? I mean, they say that you're going to be done recovering within, and recovering being multiple things, right? So, recovering from like the muscle damage, the protein utilization, I mean, your sleep debt isn't really going to be a factor that much there, or at least it's not going to be super related to that one factor. But um, that is one of the reasons that people will talk about it. They'll say protein synthesis is increased for somebody who's new, 48 to 72 hours is what's quoted a lot, at least. For somebody who's really advanced, it might be even less. So, and there you get into this kind of dichotomy where some people will say somebody is more advanced needs higher frequency because each stimulus is not going to do as much, so they need a higher frequency. And other people will say, no, people who are advanced, they're doing so much damage in a session because they're so strong and they need all that volume that they will need maybe like 5 or 7 days between. So you do have those camps. But in general, yes, I'd say that's a reason to argue for higher frequency. Now, ultimately, Do I think it's going to make a huge difference? Not really. But I do think almost all the evidence is for a higher frequency, meaning higher like 2 to 3 times a week instead of once a week.
Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, I think the benefit of higher frequency mainly just comes down to volume allocation and just fatigue management and energy management, motivational management per session. So I just like to have shorter sessions, and if I was only doing 6 sets per week like Dave, then probably I would train less frequently. But even to get in 12 sets, I just really even 4 sets for a given muscle group, especially for more demanding muscle groups like thighs, I would rather just do like 2 sets, or if I was to condense it a lot more, like doing 6 sets per session, like sometimes I do it, but I just don't love it. So I think that's the main benefit, that your energy and attentional focus will be better. But as far as like protein requirements, I mean that just seems very speculative. And it's also, if you have a higher volume session, you will stimulate growth for longer, basically. Like that's why now we're kind of finding that it's not needed to stimulate muscle protein synthesis each day or very frequently, because if you do a more voluminous session, that growth is going to be prolonged, and then you're still going to be repairing that damage, and actually the manifestation of that session is going to be prolonged for multiple days. So then you're just going to use more protein on other days as well. So I wouldn't really look at it on a 24-hour basis, or just only in training days. So yeah, I mean, basically there are like 2 more questions, but I think we can actually skip them for now, because
Okay.
they're kind of weird anyway. So yeah, I think this was pretty productive, actually. So yeah. Do you have any cool story to share for the end, for some laughter to the viewers? Say
Well,
something cool, something funny. Just kidding.
I'll tease my upcoming video on the bench press, because I mentioned that like bench press record again, just like a personal record of repping out 225. So I've had like much higher 1 rep maxes, but going for reps now, this was the most I've done. So the I'll basically say, so the record was set 2 weeks ago, and at the last minute, my dad touched the bar. So we don't talk anymore. We don't have a relationship at this point. So unfortunately, it's severed for life. But I will go into a video as far as what I did to rectify that. So just a teaser there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was gonna have a follow-up question on that, but then I realized that I would spoiler the video, so I'll just say it off air.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to that one. And yeah. Otherwise, where can people find you?
Yep. So Brains and Gains. I think actually I might change my name to Brains and Gains Podcast on Instagram and on YouTube. Actually, it's Brains and Gains Podcast. And that's pretty much it. Website is drdavemaconi.com.